Ahead of The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, I rewatched Captain America: Civil War. Historically, Civil War has been one of my favorite Marvel movies, and that stands after the rewatch. With the new show just around the corner, I'm writing this 3 days before the premiere, it's a great time to discuss what makes Civil War such a good movie. The answer lies within how the movie handles its conflict. So today, we're going to look at Captain America: Civil War and the 3 levels of external conflict it employs to create the best Avengers movie. There are 2 macro types of conflict in stories: internal conflict and external conflict. Internal conflict is conflict that occurs in a character's mind. It can be, and often is, influenced by external circumstances or characters, but it's ultimately up to the character experiencing the conflict to settle it within themselves.
He's consuming them. I'm done letting it consume me.
Internal conflict is an important part of any story, but this essay focuses on external conflict. External conflict occurs when a character comes against any external force that prevents them from getting what they want. It can be another character, or an animal, or a force of nature. In most Marvel movies, the external conflict is hero versus villain. Civil War eschews this by having much of its conflict come from hero versus hero. We're going to look at 3 different levels of external conflict: physical conflict, emotional conflict, and ideological conflict. Physical conflict is self-explanatory. This is physical conflict. As is that. Physical conflict is the simplest form and can certainly be the flashiest. That said, it does have a weakness. Purely physical conflict can be meaningless. It's fun to watch Black Widow beat up on those goons, and rather amusing as Falcon nonchalantly drops missiles on the people shooting at him from behind the car. But could you watch an entire movie of this? Some movie franchises are built on the back of pure stunthood, but it's hard to do well. Consider the battle against Ultron's bots in Age of Ultron. We watch the Avengers tear through wave after wave of villainous tech, but it doesn't really matter. Ripping apart these Vision wannabes has the same emotional impact as electrocuting the goons. It's fun to watch, and it's cool, but without emotional engagement, it doesn't matter. In order to give this engagement to the physical conflict, you have to mix it with the others. Emotional conflict is conflict centered around emotion. This is different than physical conflict in almost every way. The primary difference is that emotional conflict does not need to be mixed with the other types of conflict to be meaningful. It can be, as we'll see later, but emotional conflict can stand on its own. To be done well, emotional conflict needs to be true to the characters. If the emotions don't fit the character or situation, that creates a poor taste in one's mouth. Consider this clip, which comes just after the airport battle.
You got a wife and kids? I don't understand. Why didn't you think about them before you chose the wrong side?
You gotta watch your back with this guy. There's a chance he's gonna break it.
This is purely emotional conflict, and these 2 don't pull any punches. Clint and Tony throw each other's failures right at them to hit where it hurts. Emotional conflict like this works so well because it is true to their characters. Clint and Tony know each other, and they weaponize that knowledge to punish the other person. Emotional conflict can be quick burning, as in this scene, or it can simmer for a while. This scene with Tony and Steve also focuses on emotional conflict, but on a deeper level.
Oh, really? You 2 knew each other? He never mentioned that. Maybe only 1,000 times. God, I hated you.
This scene builds off Tony's strained relationship with his father, and he's genuinely jealous of Steve's relationship with Howard Stark. This sort of emotional conflict tends to run deep beneath a character's surface and can be brutally effective as a weapon. There is one level of conflict that goes deeper, however. Ideological conflict occurs when 2 characters clash over opposing ideologies. This is how Civil War sets itself apart from many of Marvel's other films. Almost all the conflict between Tony and Steve, and by proxy, the rest of the Avengers, is ideological in nature. After a botched mission, the Avengers are asked to sign the Sokovia Accords, a document that legally places them under the oversight of a UN panel. Tony thinks the Avengers have a moral obligation to sign the Accords, but Steve refuses to give up his freedom of choice. This conflict is the heart of the movie. Zemo helps escalate and accelerate a lot of the tension, but these fights were inevitable even without his meddling. Like any writing, ideological conflict can be done poorly. A lot of Marvel movies handle it with varying degrees of success. Every hero and villain pitted against each other has their own ideologies, but some fail to create engaging ideological conflict because they're unrealistic. Ultron believed that wiping out humanity is the only way to save the world. The Avengers disagreed, and voila, conflict. But it doesn't have the same resonance as Civil War because the audience will never agree with Ultron's genocidal ideology. We don't want him to win. We know that he's going to lose. But Steve and Tony both have good points. Both of their ideologies make sense, and neither is so egregious that the audience considers it instantly invalid as with Ultron's. Often, ideological and emotional conflicts bleed together. People tend to be passionate about their beliefs after all. The previous clip where Tony told Steve he wanted to punch him had both ideological and emotional conflict interwoven into it, which is a great segue into interweaving conflicts. Physical, emotional, and ideological conflicts can each sustain a scene on their own, but you get something truly great by combining them. Being an action-y superhero film, Civil War tends to mesh physical conflict with emotional and/or ideological conflict with major fights that demonstrate both. The brawl at the airport is a combination of ideology and physicality. There are emotions involved, but these emotions aren't the primary motivator behind the action. Each side is fighting because they're certain they're right. Tony and friends are trying to apprehend Steve's crew for breaking the Accords, while Steve is fighting to find Zemo and bring his own justice. This struggle seeks to answer the movie's core question: who is right, Tony or Steve? This fight ends in what is best described as a draw. Tony gets Cap's crew, but fails to get Steve or Bucky, which leaves the question unanswered. This leads directly into the final battle, where Tony fights Steve and Bucky. This fight is primarily emotional and physical. There are ideological tones to the fight, because Steve and Tony are symbols of their respective sides, but Tony's motivation is simple emotion.
I don't care. He killed my mom.
Steve fights for his friend. Bucky is the last piece of the life Steve had before going into the ice. As for Bucky, he's fighting on a similar axis to Steve, but arguably his side of the fight is less emotional, as Bucky and Tony have no prior relationship. As the fight comes to a close, it ends up tying all three conflicts together because it ends on an ideological note. As Steve leaves a defeated Iron Man behind, Tony tells him the iconic shield isn't his, it was Howard's, and it wasn't made for the man Steve has become, so Steve drops it. This isn't an emotional appeal or a physical blow. This is about ideology. The ideology of who Steve used to be and who he's become. Often, this final conflict is a proxy war between thematic ideas centered around the character's ideologies. In most Marvel movies, the hero beats the villain and the ideology of good triumphs over evil. But neither Tony nor Steve wins this fight. Had Tony won, Steve would have signed the Accords, or at least been arrested for his actions. If Steve had won, then nobody would have signed the Accords. This struggle is what makes Civil War the best Avengers movie. The stakes are believable, but most importantly, it uses conflict masterfully. Conflict is at its best when drawn from true, deep characters like Tony and Steve. Using ideologies that are believable and sympathetic to the audience allows us to truly engage with the fight instead of just the spectacle. When conflict is handled well, like this, it goes beyond harsh words or solid punches. It becomes meaningful and has a true effect on both audience and character.